Good evening, and thank you for joining us. My name is Mary Burcham, and I have the role of Community Engagement Manager at Capital Land Trust. I'm so excited to be connecting with all of you online this evening to share more about an active habitat restoration project that Capital Land Trust and our very committed partners are doing at Bloom's Preserve. This project is part of an ongoing effort to help recover an endangered species, the Oregon spotted frog, as you might have guessed. A population of Oregon spotted frogs lives at our Bloom's Preserve, but they face a challenge, and that challenge is the availability of good wetland habitat. And really, this is a challenge faced by these water-loving frogs throughout their entire range. So tonight, we're thrilled to share more information about the Oregon spotted frog, as well as our progress in improving their habitat at Bloom's Preserve. And Bloom's Preserve is a great example of when conservation is about more than acquiring land. Conservation in this case is also about restoring and preserving natural systems that sustain the South Puget Sound's plants, animals, birds, sea life, and even human life. So a little bit about Capital Land Trust. If you're new to our organization, we are a nonprofit environmental conservation organization based out of Olympia, Washington, and we are part of a network of land trusts that are in every state in the country. Since 1987, we've worked strategically to conserve our very important natural areas and working lands in South Puget Sound and the Chehalis Basin watersheds for their ecological and their community benefits. So fast forward to today, Capital Land Trust protects more than 6,600 acres on about 99 properties in the South Puget Sound and Chehalis Basin watersheds. We prioritize the conservation of shorelines and the forests, wetlands, and open space that surround them. And of course, these systems contribute to our great quality of life that we enjoy in the South Puget Sound by, doing things like filtering drinking water, cleaning air, and providing recreation opportunities. And speaking of recreation opportunities, I wanted to make sure to share that Capital Land Trust has 4 nature preserves that are open to the community. We have 2 preserves in Olympia, which are Darling Creek and Randall Preserves, and we have 2 preserves in Shelton, which are Hilburn and Bayshore Preserves. Thanks to our volunteers that help maintain these trails, people of all ages can visit and create fond memories in nature that will last a lifetime. So check out that link that just came through in the chat and check out our public access preserves later. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This evening, we are very fortunate to have 2 great guest presenters joining us, Teal Waterstrat and Laurence Reeves. I'm extremely grateful to both of you for taking the time to be here and to share about your knowledge on this subject. So Teal, I'd like to invite you to first introduce yourself and share with our audience your background. And then Laurence, if you could do the same.
Sure, thanks, May. My name is Teal Waterstrat, and I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service right here in Lacey, Washington. I read in my online bio that I completed my OSU PhD not too long ago. Unfortunately, that's a future self I haven't quite created yet, but I was fortunate to get a master's at Evergreen not too many years ago, researching freshwater mussels here in Western Washington. Before that, I worked for WDFW and a number of their conservation entities in the Northwest, but born and mostly raised here, right here in Washington State. So thanks for having me, Mary.
And I'm Laurence Reeves. I'm the Conservation Director at Capital Land Trust, and I've had the pleasure of working at Capital Land Trust for over 15 years and have done some great projects, and we'll be talking about one of them. So happy to be here.
Great. Thanks again for joining us. So let's hop in and get ready to have a new favorite animal. So over to you, Teal, to tell us a little bit more about this Oregon spotted frog.
Great. And just real quick, are you guys seeing my screen pop up there?
Yes.
All right. Did it right this time. Yep. So I'm Teal Waterstrat. As I said, I'm here at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And of course, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is nothing without its partners here. So thank you, Capital Land Trust, WDFW, other organizations and individuals that help us recover species for the public. We couldn't do anything without you. So I'm going to launch right in. Oops, wrong button. to our main attraction here, the Oregon spotted frog. And just for a little technical check here, how many can you guys raise your hands out there, or virtually raise your hands if you've seen the Oregon spotted frog out there? I'm always curious how many people in our communities are familiar. I see Kim has, of course Kim has. So it looks like a handful of you have seen, oh, here it comes. Excellent. Great. I'm always glad people are aware of these kind of rare and unique organisms that live in their backyards and their communities. I'm trying to showcase on the screen here some of the photo shots we have of all the Oregon spotted frog life stages. So the frog, of course, is not just a frog, but it is also a tadpole. It is also egg masses, and a big part of our watersheds here in Western Washington. So a long time ago, our frog, the precious frog, ranged from the Fraser River in southwestern British Columbia all the way down into the Klamath drainage of Northern California. This kind of classic Pacific Northwest range that, you know, is kind of identifies our region itself. Unfortunately, over the years, that range declined due to a number of events: invasive species moving in, habitat modifications, changes to water availability for the species. And by about the 1980s, herpetologists had given up on the Oregon spotted frog in the western US, or the western part of its range. So this little quote here comes from a great little field guide. You're probably not going to find this. Sorry, that was a little blurry. This field guide in your local bookstores anymore, except at the bottom down the use section. But these historical kind of field guides provide a lot of interesting information. And in this one, the herpetologists of the time declared in 1986, down near Vancouver, Washington, we found the last Oregon spotted frog in Western Washington or Oregon. And that's kind of the end of my presentation. We're done now. But no, as ever hopeful conservation biologists, people took that more as a challenge than as a fact. And so our partners at WDFW, two individuals, took it upon themselves to find the species again. I'm curious if either of them are here today, if Kelly or Bill are in the audience today, but two of our state partners embarked on quite a journey to disprove the common belief that Oregon spotted frogs were gone from west of the Cascades. They spent several years searching all over Washington without finding any evidence of Oregon spotted frogs. Then one day, after they were done with their surveys, not too far away from the Darling Creek Preserve, in fact, just downriver from the Darling Creek Preserve, the legend says that one of these individuals, Bill Leonard, started dancing around and doing all sorts of strange things on a field visit when he was assessing wetlands. And lo and behold, if he hadn't found an Oregon spotted frog. So on October 24th of 1990, just downstream of Capital Land Trust Darling Creek Preserve, Oregon spotted frogs were once again on our conservation radar, west of the Cascades in Washington State. So that sparked a large series of additional surveys, a refinement of how we were understanding the frog and how it was using its habitat, and kind of sparked the place that we're at now with the understanding of the distribution and abundance of Oregon spotted frogs. And these searches were kicking off in Oregon as well. So this map is, if you have a small screen, probably a little difficult to read, but this map on the right side of your screen, those areas shaded in blue still have Oregon spotted frogs. And the ones in red, we have not been able to find frogs there again. We think they've been extirpated or no longer remain there. And you can see what was once the stronghold, the Willamette Valley of Oregon. We have never seen frogs there again. All of California, of Northern California, we've not seen them again. And portions of the central Puget Sound as well. It's very interesting in these older texts. They have pictures of Oregon spotted frogs in Lake Washington. At Long Lake over in Lacey, there's Oregon spotted frogs at one point. And it's important when looking at this map to realize these whole red watershed areas or the blue watershed areas are not still occupied, but very small portions of those watersheds still have frogs. So our portion here in the upper Chehalis is very fortunate. We actually have the most frogs here in Thurston County in the entire state. So our Black River watershed has more frogs than anywhere else in Washington state. In Oregon, they still have some pretty big strongholds. But in Washington, the Black River is our stronghold for Oregon spotted frogs. On the left side, you'll see a lot of what their habitat looks like nowadays. So a lot of it is, or most every site, except with few exceptions, are former pastures or former agricultural sites that get wet in this time of year. Not that everything's not wet this time of year right now today. We think this large reduction, or we know this large reduction in frogs, a lot of it had to do with water. So these frogs are our most aquatic frogs. We have lots of other frogs that lay eggs, have tadpoles, and those frogs, as soon as they have legs, they go off into the woods or off into the uplands or off into the desert. But these frogs, they don't leave the water. So they're very sensitive to changes in hydrology and availability of water. We had a lot of change in vegetation community. Probably any of you that have volunteered for Capital Land Trust or other conservation organs know about reed canary grass and how that just kind of overwhelms our emergent wetlands. It's been a really big challenge for the frog as well. We've also had a lot of non-native species come in. Bullfrogs, incredible species. They're incredible competitors. They have an incredible appetite and they have an incredibly big mouth. And all those things didn't line up very well for our Oregon spotted frog. There's a number of other non-native species too that will impact Oregon spotted frog more competitively than ingestively, but still trouble for us as well. And also, you've probably heard quite a bit about chytrid and white nose syndrome and all sorts of avian influenza. So diseases out there, novel diseases that our amphibians are not adapted to as well. A good reminder to myself to clean boots and field gear when entering conservation sites and when you're out there enjoying the wilderness. So all these different factors that impacted the frogs, the loss of water, invasive plants and animals coming into its habitat, they led to conservation entities such as the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, our state and Canadian partners, to list these frogs as imperiled, endangered, or threatened. In my role at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, these species are listed as threatened under the Endangered Species Act. And that rule happened in late 2014. And then a couple of years later, we designated critical habitat for the species as well. Here in Washington State, the state regulatory agency, Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, the species is endangered in Washington State. So a little higher order of magnitude within the state. So who remembers this slide? Everybody, it's been quite some time since I first saw this slide, but I've remembered it through my life. And, you know, I know all of you out there are aware of the frog life history, but it's an important part of the restoration story. I think Laurence is going to tell us a little bit later in about Bloom's Ditch and the important aspects of this restoration and how it impacts and benefits each life stage of the frog. Because I said, this frog likes its water and it doesn't get out. So I'm going to break down the life history of the frog into different little stages real quickly. I'm going to talk about its breeding habitat, its tadpole or rearing life state habitat, what it's doing in the summer, and what it does as an adult. So the breeding habitat, the breeding period for the species is going to kick off in just a couple months in February, kind of when we all reach our nadir of tolerance for the cold, dark Northwest is really when the frogs start becoming most excited for us. That's their happy time. We used to call it the Valentine's Day was kind of our initiation of frog breeding. That's usually when we get just enough sunlight for the frogs to start laying their egg masses. And they're breeding, you probably see egg masses of different amphibians everywhere on sticks and everything like that. But Oregon spotted frogs are really special. They lay their eggs at the very shallow edge of wetlands. So you will see people out there walking around in chest waders, but ideally, this is the boot size, the boot height you need to look for Oregon spotted frogs. So we usually say about 6 inches of water is where they like to get their eggs. That never works out that way. Certainly never wear boots that size when you're out surveying for amphibians. You'll just end up with wet socks and a sad face. But they really use that shallow edge. And they also lay their eggs there on the shallow edge. They need a bit of room to lay their eggs. So we don't want a steep edged area for them. We want a very shallow and flat or low gradient for these eggs. That allows the frogs to kind of move and the tadpoles to kind of move with the water. They also need, this comes later, I guess more, but they also need an herbaceous wetland. So we like to see not a lot of shade there. We like to see lots of low vegetation. They're breeding in February and March here in Thurston County, and it's really cold. A lot of times when you read about the species, you'll read about it's a warm water species. Well, maybe in August and September, it's a warm water species, but there are no warm water species in Washington in February. So it needs every little ray of sunshine it can to help get its eggs developing early in the year. That's important because this frog, doesn't have a lot of protective ability. It needs to get its eggs out before everybody else is out there to gobble them up when the tadpoles are going. So they're an early breeder. They get a little bit of a head start on the season ahead of everybody else. So this is an example of what really extensive, broad breeding habitat might look like for a frog. This is near Mount Adams, as you can probably tell by the prominently displayed Mount Adams picture there. But these are hundreds of acres of breeding habitat down in Klickitat County. So I want to show a little bit of what their egg masses look like. And this is really, really what we're hoping to see this spring, right, Mary? When we get out there to Bloom's Ditch, there's a lot of these egg masses in the restoration area. But these are about kind of a clear jelly-packed bundle of eggs, about the size of the grapefruit after it swells up with water. Usually they're laid not singly, but together, touching or on top of each other. This can be a tricky one, but they're not attached to vegetation. A lot of other amphibians use a brace or a stick or something to lay their egg masses around. But Oregon spotted frogs, they just plop them down on the shallow end. There's no need for a stick. They're, as you can see in that image, they're half in and half out of the water typically. And again, in those sunny spots, I think down here you can see 2 Oregon spotted frogs. This is part of their communal laying. So they'll gather around these special locations and lay lots and lots of eggs there if there's lots and lots of frogs. So this is an example of like a small cluster of eggs. You can see the individual ones circled there in blue. Looks like there's about 6 there. That's a lot of what we see. This is really what we want to see. And I was really excited for my colleagues to get to see this cluster. This is up in Whatcom County, but we have a lot of frogs. And hopefully this is coming through on your screens. This is about 120 egg masses all laid together. And we have a really strong population numbers and abundant number of frogs. We can get these huge explosive events, which really help catapult the species from kind of a low-level population into a higher-level population if these egg masses make it through into frogs the first year. So these are exciting events for us to see. It's exciting to see these. This is a restoration site up north, so it's really exciting to see these things happen in restoration sites over a matter of several years. Of course, the tadpoles or the larvae. A lot of times tadpoles will hatch out. This is another way to tell Oregon spotted frogs. Tadpoles hatch out and they leave the egg masses. They'll go into the wetland, go hide and disappear. Oregon spotted frog tadpoles, when they hatch, they stay on top of the egg masses. There's a lot of thought about why they do that. Is it warmer in the jelly? Is there some protective nature to the jelly? Are they feeding on algae that's growing in the jelly? I don't think we have an exact answer yet, but it's a really interesting behavioral characteristics of these species. It can be hard to tell tadpoles apart at these easy stages, but we can sometimes tell by this kind of aggregating behavior on top of the egg masses. This is a really high mortality time for the species. I think you guys all know the salmon story, the salmon life cycle. Like so many of those salmon that hatch out of the reds never make it back to their natal streams. So many of these tadpoles that hatch out of the egg masses, a very few of them make it back to their natal wetland the next year. But important part of the ecosystem, they provide food for all sorts of other great things that grow in wetlands. And I'm going to pause to share this kind of habitat portion of their life cycle. And this is one of the most critical parts of the life stage. We're finding now we spent a lot of time learning how to manage this breeding habitat so it's just perfect for the frogs, cutting down vegetation, restoring wetlands with this kind of low stature emergent vegetation. And now we're really starting to focus in on this legs to eggs part of the life cycle. So we can it's not hard to make a shallow emergent wetland right now, right? The whole county is a shallow emergent wetland today. But keeping the habitat conditions to where the tadpoles can move back towards permanent water in the summertime as they're developing is really key to ensuring their recovery and long-term use of the site. So at the bottom, I'm trying to put together kind of a pictorial version of what a site would look like through a year. So we have on the left there, the big flooded wetland in February. Water is kind of trickling back through summer. And then by September, October, there's just this one permanent water body there. And that is the key. Keeping that water and keeping connections back to the permanent water is the key from the frogs getting from legs or from eggs all the way to legs and back again. And then this is the frog itself. So like we said, hardly anybody makes it there. It munches on a lot of invertebrates. Sometimes it'll eat little vertebrate species. We've seen sticklebacks and occasionally a mud minnow in its stomach. But it's an ambush predator. It's kind of like the alligator of our wetlands here. We don't have 20-foot long alligators or crocodiles roaming around Thurston County, but we do have 5 or 3 to 3-inch frogs lurking around doing exactly the same behavior in our wetlands. Lots of things like to eat the Oregon spotted frog. That's okay. Sometimes it's very frustrating for us as conservation biologists to see all our hard work go down the throat of another species. But otters, raccoons, great blue herons. We've even seen wood ducks actually gobbling up tadpoles too. So all sorts of things eat the Oregon spotted frog, but that's just indicative of its role in the ecosystem and how healthy ecosystems are functioning. These frogs, our typical thought about frogs is they're pretty short-lived, but some of the work that's being done here in Thurston County and elsewhere is showing us some pretty interesting things about the species. We were just talking with some of our colleagues up in British Columbia a month ago, and they have 12-year-old frogs that are still reproducing every year for them in some of their captive rearing facilities. We have some pit tag frogs here in Thurston County that are going on the decadal kind of part of their life. So they can live longer than we think. And that's really encouraging for us because a lot of times we'll have sites where we just don't see frogs for years. And then maybe we have a good year. This is going to be a wet winter. Maybe those frogs the old crafty frogs that have been hiding out for several years come back out in these great breeding seasons and utilize the habitats that are there. They can move quite a ways over near Darling Creek down into the Black River floodplain. In that corridor there, we've recorded frogs moving about 5 kilometers along watershed. So these frogs, on a day like today, you may see them out of the water moving around in these heavy precipitation events, but typically those movements occur along aquatic corridors, so along a creek, through a wetland, outer ditch system. Those sorts of movements are the larger movements the species will make. And it's kind of interesting in Oregon, these frogs are found in really high conditions. Downtown Bend has a little population of Oregon spotted frogs in it. Those frogs, in the wintertime, they're out. They're under the water, tucked on the edges of the banks and in beaver dams hibernating. Our frogs here in Thurston County, we'll get some hard freezes for a day or a week or something like that, but they can remain active throughout the year. So it's kind of fun. This time of year is almost like the high tide of frogs right now. As the water level's up, I always picture like the frogs kind of riding the wave of the water in our wetlands up into the edges. They're staging, they're moving around. There's not a lot of prey out, but they're still moving and staging out there for us. If you get to work with Oregon spotted frogs, doing everything properly and making sure you're working with experienced people, you'll find out they're not very good at getting away from you. If you move slow, they move slow. They think they're the sneakiest frog in the world and nobody else can see them. That works well for them sometimes. They are very cryptic. I walk right by them all the time without seeing them. Their whole deal is not being seen. So it's very interesting. Sometimes you can just move slowly and just kind of touch them right on top. You'd think an endangered species would be afraid of everything and trying to do everything it can to get away from big, awkward people like myself. but that's not their behavior at all. But it also allows prey items to come really close to them. So if you see a frog, you can frog gaze for 20 minutes and see nothing happen. They don't even blink. And then all of a sudden something will crawl down and they'll launch themselves out, gobble it in one bite, and then go back to not moving for a long time. So they're very, very ambush oriented and very cryptic individuals. Lastly, the dry season. So our August, September, October, this is when they're using the last of the water, kind of permanent water sources in Thurston County. Excuse me. Typically, this will be connected to a kind of the larger wetland area earlier in the year, in the wet time of year. And a lot of the time, this is mainly herbaceous vegetation. So, you know, if you come up through our educational system and learning about salmons, we're always talking about cold, clean, clear water. You picture the old growth forest with cobblestones and gravel along the bottom, dark and cool. That's not where you're going to find your Oregon spotted frogs in the summertime. You're going to find them in that kind of water that kind of don't want to put your hand in. It's going to be warm. It's going to be filled with great algae. It's going to be really nutrient rich. It's not going to be moving. If the water is moving, it'll be very slowly. So kind of opposite of what you'd see for your classic salmon habitat there. So real quick, we want fresh water. The bigger, the better. Large, shallow areas for breeding habitat this time of year, and permanent water available for them year round. That connection, that hydrology, and not along a river, not like a fish barrier, but kind of that connection between the seasonal breeding habitat and the permanent water later in the year. A nice, easy. Frogs don't like to climb mountains. It's at least not this one. Maybe the Cascade frogs and the tail frogs are great mountain climbers, but this is kind of more of a slip and slide kind of frog. It likes that kind of topography. Emergent wetland vegetation, that just means not trees, essentially. Most of our sites are wholly reed canary grass unless the large restoration activity is taken care of. And reed canary grass, again, is that invasive grass that we see everywhere here. And a lot of sunshine for these species. We get teased a little bit about our sunny frogs, and frog biologists only go out when it's, the sunnier places. But we do it in February, so it's still cold for us. And last, this is something I keep trying to talk to, making sure everybody understands the frogs, but we need that connectivity between seasonal habitats. If you break that connectivity, that kind of tidal flow, right now we're going to high tide for frogs. Around June, we'll be going back to low tide for frogs. But if we don't have that connectivity of hydrology between the two places, we'll strand our tadpoles. They won't have anywhere to go. They don't have lungs. They can't breathe the air, and they will perish in those types of habitats. So it's really easy to make sinks sometimes to these frogs, or think at this time of year in breeding season, we have great habitat. Everything's all wet. You'll see egg masses sometimes. So those egg masses never even had a chance to develop. In sometimes when the hydrology is too flashy, the water moves up and down too quickly, or if there's some kind of physical barrier in between them and the permanent water. That's my big presentation for today, but I'm going to be around all evening for questions, and certainly feel free to reach out and contact me anytime later. I'll put my contact information up here, but you can reach out to Capital Land Trust. I think they can get a hold of me too. So anyway, thank you, Mary. And Laurence, I think this is my cue for you. Stop sharing.
Great, thanks, Teal. That was fascinating. Every time I hear you talk, I learn more about the Oregon spotted frog, and it's really amazing. So thank you for that. So yeah, this to tell you sort of how this project came about. It started when Capital Land Trust got contacted by the landowner of the Blooms Preserve property, that's Barb Holm, and that was in 2016. And she was interested in selling part of her 300-acre farm to Capital Land Trust. We've been working in the Black River watershed since our founding in 1987, and we've conserved over 1,500 acres in the watershed. the map shows the watershed, which is marked in pink dashes, and all of the great conservation that has occurred, not just by Capital Land Trust, by other conservation partners as well. And you can see Bloom's Ditch is labeled up here at the top center, and the home farm is that entire orange colored polygon. So the home farm had a long history of agricultural use, from dairy cows to beef cattle to hay production, and is typical with agricultural lands. The land was altered from its original condition in an attempt to make farming easier and more productive. And one of the common land alterations was to ditch streams and wetlands. So Bloom's Ditch wasn't always a ditch. In fact, the lower reaches of it, after it crosses under Little Rock Road, look much more like a natural creek with meanders and pools. One of the reasons we were interested in this property was because there are a number of fish species that use this portion of the ditch, including fish we observed in these photos. We found juvenile coho salmon, Olympic mud minnow, riffle sculpin, and three-pine stickleback. And also there's nearly a mile of Bloom's Ditch on the property. So there's a lot of restoration potential as well that, really made this a great property for us from a conservation and acquisition standpoint. Now, funding for acquisition projects is always a limiting factor in our work. So because of the size of the property, we broke the acquisition down into 2 phases over a 3-year period. So in 2018, we purchased 60 acres, shown in yellow on the left side of the map. And in 2020, we purchased the remaining 82 acres, outlined in orange, on the right side of the map, for a total of 142 acres between both phases. The project was a great success all the way around. Parts of the farm that have productive soils stayed in agricultural production, while the areas less suited for farming with wetlands and riparian habitat are now protected in perpetuity. Now, early on, we learned that Oregon spotted frog egg masses had been found in the area, and Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife asked if they could survey our newly acquired Bloom's Preserve to look for egg masses. So this photo shows WDFW biologist Emily Butler surveying Oregon spotted frog egg masses on a nearby property. And you can see it looks a lot like the photos that Teal had. Once we discovered there were Oregon spotted frogs using the property, we started talking to WDFW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and the Center for Natural Lands Management about how we could enhance the property to provide better Oregon spotted frog habitat. Now, the science behind Oregon spotted frog habitat enhancement is not as robust as, say, salmon habitat enhancement. So there was a lot of discussion and revision that ultimately led to our final design. And here you can see the design, and it calls for excavating 24 small, shallow ponds in clusters of 4. And you can see that Bloom's Ditch is directly adjacent to those pond clusters just to the north. Each pond is about 3 feet deep, and it's ringed with a shallow 6-inch deep shelf that's intended to provide the breeding habitat for the frogs. This photo shows the project area prior to the start of our work. And here you can see where we started to do some of the reed canary grass control. And if you're not familiar with reed canary grass, it's an invasive grass. It's tall, coarse, and it forms dense mats of roots and vegetation that essentially prevents anything else from growing in its midst. And unfortunately, the only way to control it is by cutting it and then spraying the regrowth with herbicide. Another challenge we had at the start of the project was with permitting. It took us 2 years longer than expected to get the permits we needed to do this project. The only good thing about that is we got an extra year to do reed canary grass treatment, which was definitely beneficial. So this photo is from this spring, and you can see how effective the reed canary grass treatment was. Most of the site was bare soil, which really helped in laying out the ponds on the ground and moving the equipment around. This photo shows construction of the first pond clusters at the south end of the project site, and we started the construction in early August. The contractor used wood chips for the temporary access road, which mostly worked well, although the haul truck did get stuck on several occasions. And one of the things that I think is interesting about this photo is if you look at how much reed canary grass has grown since the previous photo, which showed it, pretty much bare soil. So even with all that treatment we did, the reed canary grass is still coming back, and we're going to have to contend with that. This is another view of the first completed pond cluster. You can see Bloom's Ditch is in the upper right-hand corner. What's interesting here is that the water that's in the ponds isn't rainwater, because this was early August, so things were still really dry. Once the excavator reached about 3 feet in depth within each pond, there was a gravel layer in the soil profile that held water year-round. And once that was reached, the water would start seeping upwards and fill the ponds fairly quickly. And this is where I'll give a shout out to Tom Terry. He's one of our amazing volunteers who had the foresight to install a series of test wells on the site in advance of construction to collect information on the water table. And then this information informed us how deep the ponds needed to be to hold water year-round. So this is a completed pond excavation, and we finished all the excavation work in roughly mid-September. The next step was to plant in and around the ponds using emergent wetland species like sedge, bulrush, arrowhead, as well as willow live stakes around the edge of the pond clusters. We worked with a local entity called Sound Native Plants, which specializes in restoration planting. The role of the vegetation here is twofold. We want to provide habitat for the frogs, as Teal mentioned, but also to try to prevent the site from getting overwhelmed with reed canary grass again. As you can see, the planting was challenging work. Sound Native Plants had a large crew, and they worked really hard, and they planted over 30,000 plants. The planting started in early October, and by then we had had some rain. And so here, again, you can see how fast the reed canary grass is coming back right around the areas that, after those ponds were dug, it was just bare soil. And this photo shows the ponds filling up with rainwater this fall, after all most of the plantings were completed at this point. And this photo provides a great view of a pond cluster with the 4 ponds and the shallow breeding shelves surrounding the ponds. And you can see Bloom's Ditch is on the right edge of the photo. So this is kind of goes back to what Teal was talking about with, you want to have the shallow areas, you want to have deeper areas with permanent water. And then of course, Bloom's Ditch holds water year round as well. So having the ponds situated really close to Bloom's Ditch is going to hopefully provide that linkage between the shallow water in the spring and having permanent water in the summer. We also planted some willow live stakes, Oregon ash, and black cottonwood along a portion of Bloom's Ditch to provide shade to benefit the fish that we found in the ditch. And Mary talked about the willow live stakes. Here's a close-up of the willow live stakes. You can see in the upper right-hand corner, they come in bundles, and the stakes can just be inserted directly into the ground, and it'll take root and leaf out in the spring. But this is also literally a beaver buffet. So when we plant these live stakes, the beavers just come out and hammer them. So, hopefully there'll be enough left in place that they'll take root and provide some of that buffer between the reed canary grass and the ponds that we're hoping for. Now, some of the challenges that we face so far are that the buried ends of the pond logs popped out of the ground once the water level increased, forcing us to secure them with T-posts so they would stay in place. And you can see that in the photo on the left, where one of those logs has come up out of the ground. And the planting crew on several occasions found some of their plantings had been uprooted and gnawed on when they returned to the site in the morning. And I expect our biggest challenges will be how much damage the beavers and nutria will cause to our new plantings, and then also keeping the reed canary grass at bay. The photo on the right shows a well-established willow having to contend with both beavers and getting crowded out by the reed canary grass. We'll likely have some great work parties, though, if anyone's interested. So, to help us maintain the ponds and the plantings and keep the reed canary grass at bay. So keep an eye on our website and our Heron newsletter for those opportunities. And of course, no Capital and Trust presentation is complete without thanking everyone who helped to make this project succeed. Starting with our former staff member, Tom Woodruff, who led both phases of the acquisition. And as a project manager for the habitat enhancement phase, I'm grateful for the help of Tom Terry, who's pictured here on the left, and his team of volunteers who gave us incredible insight into the hydrology, biology, and just the general intricacies of the site. Mike Melton provided a lot of great aerial photos, many of which you've seen in this presentation. The acquisition and restoration funders, which include Thurston County Conservation Futures, the Doris Duke Charitable Foundation, Black Hills Audubon, and especially the Washington Recreation and Conservation Office. As I mentioned, this project took a lot longer because of the permitting. I'm so thankful for their grant managers who cheerfully granted me multiple grant extensions as we slogged through the permitting process. I'm sure somewhere in the RCO building, there's the wall of shame, and my face is up there for having to get so many extensions, but they really were helpful. And I'm just so gratified to see that the project is finally completed. We also couldn't have done it without the design input and technical assistance from WDFW, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, the Center for Natural Lands Management and Waterfall Engineering, and certainly the crew of Sound Native Plants. And a huge shout out to Doug Littauer at Salix Environmental, who he single-handedly wrangled all of the permits, which were holding up this project. And also Silas Lampley of Streamline Earthworks, who also single-handedly and expertly operated all of the equipment used to construct the project. So it was a one-person show that made all of that construction happen. And of course, I want to thank all of our supporters whose generosity helps us keep doing this great work. And for our last slide, to end on a hopeful note, once the ponds filled up with water, we saw Pacific chorus frogs, which that's the top photo. And no disrespect to the Oregon spotted frog, but I really like Pacific chorus frogs. They're my favorite frog. I think they're so cute, and I like the color of them too. But anyway, we also started to see some northern red-legged frogs. That's the photo on the left, both of those using the sites after the pond started to fill up with water. And of course, the most exciting thing is that there's an Oregon spotted frog was seen resting on a recently planted sedge in one of the new ponds. And that was captured in the photo on the right. So we now know that there are Oregon spotted frogs using the site, which is really cool. So that's all I have. Mary, I'll turn it back to you, and we'll have an opportunity to take some questions.
Awesome. Thanks, Laurence. I'm going to, yeah. Oops. I think I just removed Laurence's spotlight. Sorry about that. Great. Yeah. Thank you so much, Teal and Laurence. I hope our audience, falling in love with this frog a little bit at a time. I know I am. I loved learning all about their life cycle, and I just love seeing all the great progress that restoration project has made so far. I'm now going to introduce Capital Land Trust Outreach and Education Coordinator, Sarah Croston. Sarah is going to moderate the question and answer portion of this event. So if questions pop in your head, keep them coming in the chat box and we'll get to as many as we can. Sarah, I'll hand it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Mary. Again, thank you, Laurence and Teal, for your wonderful presentations. And we already have a number of questions popping up in the chat. So I'm gonna, the first one, I think, Teal, I'm gonna hand off to you. So the question is, thoughts on the presence of beaver survival of Oregon spotted frogs, especially as it relates to creating connectivity between habitat?
Yeah, beavers are great. The reduction in the number of beavers in kind of these lowland wetlands has been, I guess, instrumental to the change in a lot of our larger wetland systems. And where we have beavers, especially in even drier places, such as down in southern Oregon where this frog exists, those are the only places we're still seeing those frogs or where beavers are hanging on. So they're maybe not the beavers themselves, but the things they make, which of course won't be made without the beavers there to maintain and build them for us, are really important for the survival of Oregon spotted frogs. Put a little asterisk on that. I'd also say it's a challenging place to work with beavers. Beavers aren't subject to state, federal, county, or other rules. They do what they want to do, and they don't always do it where we want them to or where our neighbors want them to do. So these larger conservation areas like Bloom's Ditch or Bloom's Preserve, in areas like that, where there's room to let beavers explore and be beavers and not impact infrastructure, neighbors, and everybody else's land use are really important. So the kind of work and the kind of footprint that Capital Land Trust has on the landscape really helps beavers do a lot of the work for us. And I think that's ultimately our goal. And I think part of the Land Trust goal as well is to let nature take back over and help maintain and manage these. And for the record, I'm all for those beavers eating all the willows.
And another question that we have here from Chad, has there, and Teal, this would be a question for you, have there been attempts to reintroduce Oregon spotted frogs to the Willamette Valley or other areas of its historic range?
There have not been any events, any formal events that I am aware of to reintroduce it to the Willamette Valley. There are some challenges mainly with bullfrogs and hydro periods there that, you know, it's one of the challenges with reintroducing species is we have to make sure that the conditions are correct for them to thrive. And a lot of our work still focused on the existing population. So part of the work we try to do really is to bolster those frog populations where we know they can exist in the wild on their own. Hopefully there's a bright future for Oregon spotted frogs in the Willamette Valley. I think a lot of people would like to see that, but at this time, I'm unaware of such an effort.
And speaking of bullfrogs, a question has popped up. Are there bullfrogs in the system at Bloom's Ditch? And if yes, is bullfrog removal being conducted?
We have seen juvenile bullfrogs. Terry may have a more comprehensive answer than me for that. I think we'll be monitoring them. Part of the restoration design is trying to thread that line between what bullfrogs like for habitat and what Oregon spotted frogs like for habitat. So some of that shallow gradient, instead of making deep incised ponds, some of that not only does it help support the Oregon spotted frog, but also kind of reduces the likelihood the bullfrogs will be there and reproducing in the future. I think Tom and the site stewards have monitored closely. I haven't heard of any bullfrogs in the restoration site yet, and we're hoping it stays that way.
And a fun question, Kim asks, what do the frogs sound like?
Ooh. Do you want to hear the fun way? We can do it two ways. Can I share my screen really quick, Sarah?
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do it the official way, and then we'll do it the fun way. Does that sound okay? Great question, Kim. So is my screen shared? So turn up your volume, everyone. Is that playing? Everybody can hear that tapping sound? No?
I could not hear it. Maybe if you want to share the unofficial
Yeah, let's
noise
do
of
that.
the frogs.
Let me
This
stop.
this one's more fun.
Yeah. Have I stopped sharing yet? Or am I still sharing?
It's just you and us, like our
Yeah,
faces.
it
So I
doesn't
think
look
you've
like
Great.
you're
Yeah.
So
sharing.
sorry
Yeah.
you couldn't hear the official song. This is the much more fun way to do it. So everybody can participate in this. We can all learn and listen together. So sit up straight, kind of fill up your lungs, raise your hand over your head, open your mouth in kind of an O shape. So that is the call of the Oregon spotted frog. You can hear where they're abundant, but everybody can call the Oregon spotted frog. It's way easier than bird songs. It's pretty distinct. They'll call under the water and above the water. But yeah, it's a good one. We all have flat heads. All herpetologists have flat heads for making that calling sound. So if you see me out there on the side of the road or standing in the water, kind of knee deep in water, hitting myself in the head, it's not frustration. It's I'm calling them in.
And I think we probably have time for about one more question. Teal, for you, what can I do as an individual to help Oregon spotted frog population?
Yeah, well, there's lots of things people can do. You know, one of course is don't have a pet bullfrog. If you educate yourself about invasive species, that's something that, you know, I have kids in junior high and elementary school, and it's been really heartening to hear about their education, things I didn't learn about when I was in that stage. So native species are important, and native ecosystems are really important. A lot of the educational material you'll see from things like stream teams, those campaigns like, you know, how to do an oil change, how to wash your car, keeping those contaminants out of the water. You know, sometimes just having fun out in nature is really important. We get observations from all sorts of people and places from Oregon spotted frogs, about Oregon spotted frogs. We still hope there's more Oregon spotted frogs out there. You know, there's a lot of concern sometimes about regulatory agencies and their knowledge of where a listed species are. We're here to work with the community. Like, we are the Fish and Wildlife Service. That service is to the people of the communities, the United States. It's not against, it's a service for them. So we work like, it's a great example, like with Capital Land Trust, that was voluntary. You know, that was part of the dream to restore that site. So working within our community is really what we like to do to help these species. I think that's, I don't know, working together, I think, is the most important thing we can do for any rare species, is helping each other understand and learn from each other about how we can work as a community to restore ecosystems, natures, and build our community around that.
Well, thank you so much for taking the time to answer these questions. And I hope everyone's appreciation for this frog and local land conservation has grown. I know I'm going to work on my frog calling right after this presentation. At this point in time, I'm going to turn it over to our Development and Communications Director, Allison, to close out this conservation conversation.
Hey, thank you all for joining us tonight for just this wonderful presentation about the Oregon spotted frog and habitat restoration. As Sarah mentioned, my name is Allison, and I am the Development and Communications Director. And tonight, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to donate and to help fund our numerous habitat restoration projects, which support healthy ecosystems for fish, frogs, and wildlife. So if you're inspired by tonight's presentation and you want to be a part of our mission to protect local lands and waters, please consider giving a gift.